The Russian Orthodox Church has been living on Alaska soil for nearly 200 years. Little flowers must be reborn each year. Providing for their colorful return requires a bit of care to ensure fall bulbs bring spring flowers.
Jackie Lawrenson is a member of the Juneau Garden Club. She is recognized as a master gardener by the Cooperative Extension Service. She is both a lecturer and a columnist on gardening in Southeast. I asked her what the key to a nice garden is.
The most important part of any garden is the soil. That's your basic building material. And we have basically 3 kinds of soils in Juneau. And what you're apt to find if you live in the valley is this kind of clay, silty clay. And you can tell if you have clay, it'll roll into a ball, and there it is, and it won't drain. You might have a gravelly, sandy stuff if you've built right on the subsoil. And this has absolutely no nutrient value at all. The clay has nutrients, doesn't drain. This drains, but there's nothing in it for the plants to eat. If you built on what was forested land, you're apt to have this very rich, peaty soil. It's good soil, lots of nutrients, but it's very acid, and again, it won't drain. So you have to add things. You can mix them together in different quantities. You may have to add peat moss, which you can purchase. Ideally, you're going to end up with something that has a good, what they call a tithe to it, or tith to it. It crumbles nicely in your hands, it drains well, and it's a good ratio of organic stuff like the peat or this forest loam and the stuff that drains, which is the sand. So you just go for a good mix of good draining things, granular things, and then the things that have the nutrients in it. When you're planting bulbs, you try to go for a natural effect, and you get that effect not by lining up tulips or daffodils in little rows like soldiers. That looks pretty artificial. You want to get a natural effect, and to do that, you can take the bulbs and just toss them out with your hands. Just let them fall randomly, and always plant a mass of color. Bulbs look very silly, one here, one there. You don't get a very good, massive, impressive effect. Plant at least 10 or 12 bulbs together, and of the crocus, plant 20 or 30 together in a sweep or a drift. Dig your hole and put daffodils and tulips go down, 6 to 8 inches, even a little deeper for tulips. Dig a nice hole so you kind of loosen the soil, not just the width of the hole. That's why I don't like those bulb planters. They just dig a little narrow tunnel. But loosen up that soil pretty good to the right depth. Before you plant the bulb, take a handful of steamed bone meal, or I use good fertilizer, 10-20-10 for our poor soils. Just mix a couple little tablespoons down in there, work it around, and then set the bulb root side down, obviously, pointed side up for daffodils and tulips. Set it down in there, and then very gently, making sure you don't tip the bulb over, cover that up and just pack it lightly. And notice this soil is going to drain well. It does have quite a bit of gravel in it, but you need that. Bulbs will not tolerate a wet soil. Another good place to plant bulbs is in a rock garden. Many of the things that bloom in a rock garden, such as the primroses and other alpines, do bloom in the spring. About the same time the bulbs will bloom, so you have a nice combination of spring blooming plants. Now, after the bulbs are done blooming, you need to leave the foliage on the plant, and it does get to look pretty ratty, but what is happening is that the leaves of the daffodils and the tulips and the other bulbs are making food that is going down the leaf and into the bulb, and what that does is make food for the bulb to use next year when it blooms. So you have to leave those leaves on, and you can plant over the top of them with various things, and I'll talk about that later. But once these are done making food, they'll start to shrivel and turn yellow. And that's the time when you can cut them off. Just hold them up and snip them off at the ground level. Don't cut them off before they've turned brown and shriveled up, because you will essentially you'll be cutting off the blooms that you would have next year. Now, this will leave some pretty bare places in your garden unless you have planted over the top of them with other things. And some of the things that you can use to fill in the bare places that were occupied by the flowering bulbs are annuals. If you want to do the simplest thing, take a package of nasturtium seeds, sprinkle nasturtium seeds around and poke them in the ground, and they will grow and cover up what was a blooming bulb area that's now a bare spot in your garden. Other plants that you can use are the annuals such as the alyssum. They're low growing and they don't put down a very long root, so they won't interfere with the bulbs. Another thing you can do is plant bulbs among sedum, ground cover of this type. The bulbs will come up through the sedum early in the spring and be tall. Once the leaves start to die back, you can pull the leaves kind of under and tuck them under the sedum. The sedum will be by that time starting to grow and will cover over those unsightly leaves as they ripen. So there are lots of things you can use to plant over the top of the bulbs once they're stopped blooming, and that will cover up those unsightly places in your garden.
If you have trouble finding a wide enough selection of bulbs in Juneau, a number of catalogs are available. But be certain that you select varieties proven to do well in our climate.
The bulb varieties that do best here really are tulips, daffodils, the little grape hyacinth, the little small blue ones, and crocuses. And when you go to buy these bulbs locally, you need to look for healthy bulbs, because occasionally you will come across some bulbs that just aren't in good condition. When you look for a healthy bulb, I'm going to show an onion simply because it is a bulb, and you can grow allium here, which is a flowering onion. But this onion shows what you look for when you buy bulbs. This is a mold on here, and it can be this gray-blue or sometimes tan. Don't buy a bulb that's moldy. That's an unhealthy bulb. Don't buy a bulb that's completely dried out and crumbly. It's no longer living. Don't buy a bulb that has any obvious bruises, and don't buy a bulb that has mushy spots. You pick out a bulb basically the way you'd pick out an onion or a potato or any kind of a root vegetable. I think people should plant bulbs because we have so many gray days in the spring, and if you get your bulbs in the ground and you get some color in the early spring, it gives you the enthusiasm and kind of the hope to get out there and plant the garden for the rest of the year.
Information about gardening in Southeast is available through the Cooperative Extension Service in Juneau. You can visit their office in the Federal Building or call 586-7102. Their mail address in Juneau is Box 109, zip code 99802.